What do you know about politics? What should you know? Forget views, beliefs, and opinions. Politics is really a science, and that's where we come in. Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Goodell.
I'm Todd Kent, and we're your guides to what's actually happening in politics. We're using our years of experience to navigate political data, media, money, behavior, and more to educate and inform you.
Todd, I'm so excited to be on this program and talking about politics, but we do this all the time. We do this every day.
You know, I always tell everybody, politics is an art and a science. There's a lot of things that we see visually, but there's a lot of things going behind the scenes, and I hope that we can shed some light on that. That'll be interesting for our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, and when we talk to our students, we want them to know not only is politics, it's essential, and it's about how we build a better community, how we build a better society, how we build a stronger country.
You know, we talk a lot about civics and what that means. I think people understanding politics, understanding elections really is helpful for our world today, and I think we probably need a lot more of that.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're so excited about this show. We get to extend outside the classroom, and we get to talk to an audience about the things that we're talking about with our students and talking about with each other every day.
You know, I know that we take a professorial view, for no better words, but I think it's interesting when you get to know the nuts and the bolts and the insides of what's going on, and we become analysts every week in what's going on in the election. It's really interesting for the citizen.
Yeah, and we're constantly learning because we know some things pretty well based on what we've observed in previous elections. But each election cycle, we learn something new, and it just feels like we're constantly reevaluating what we thought we knew.
You know, we hear a lot of talk about this is the way it is. This is the way it's been the last few elections. We're seeing some thoughts that things are changing a little bit. Which, you know, there's always changes that go on, but we're seeing some kind of fundamental changes that are kind of poking their head out, and we're going to see if that really stays through with this election cycle.
Yeah. So we're glad to be here, and we're looking forward to talking to the audience. So what is this show? Well, it's not an opinion show. When we offer interpretations, they'll be based on research. They'll be based on data. They'll be based on facts. When we don't know something, we're going to call an expert. We're going to bring in someone who does know the answer.
This show is informative and educational. Your guide to a complex election year.
Who are we and why should you listen to us? Well, we're both professors of political science at Texas A&M University. We have years of experience and lots of expertise both inside the classroom and outside the classroom. My background, I've been a professor most of my life, but I've also worked in political polling. I've worked with state policymakers in terms of providing research and in terms of guiding decision-making by policymakers.
I've been in the political science world for many years, spent most of my life as a consultant for candidates running for office. So I've seen it's kind of the nitty-gritty of politics. Most recently, I've served as a professor, instructing young people what it means to work in the world of politics. So I think we're between our backgrounds, your background in media, mine in elective politics, it's going to really provide an opportunity to have interesting conversations.
Before we get into today's topics, we wanted to talk a little bit about what political science is. Todd, how do you have a definition you use in your classes? How do you define political science?
Political science is really is looking at the data, looking at and trying to understand the phenomena of politics, and then be able to generalize that for the future. So, what do we understand? What can we say about? I talk about it being an art and a science. What can we learn from looking at the data, the research that goes on, and we'll kind of talk about that. And then how can we apply that to the future, and then develop theories. And then once we do that, we can say, do these theories hold water? Or do we need to rethink what we're doing?
Yeah, politics, I think, is about who gets what, when, and where in society, the authoritative allocation of values. These are two famous definitions of politics, and we study it. We look very closely at it, but what we do is we try to put aside partisan preferences. We try to put aside our prior beliefs, and we try to examine what's going on in the data. We're trying to examine whether what we think about the world is actually what's going on with the world. And we often find that we're wrong. One of the great things about political science isn't that we're right all the time. The great thing is we're learning all the time, and we're finding out new things about the world. So in our next segment, we're going to talk about a lot of the little things that we've observed over the past couple of weeks in terms of what's going on in the election cycle and what we're learning from what's going on in these events.
Join us for Aggie Muster on Sunday, April 21st at 7 p.m. KAMU is proud to record, broadcast, and stream the campus ceremony to Aggies across the community and around the world. Watch live on KAMU TV or listen live on KAMU FM, or watch our live stream at tx.ag/KAMU Muster. We hope you'll join us.
If I can help someone learn to appreciate the nature around them, they'll become better stewards of what's around them.
It's more of a feeling for me. Like, I'm not trying to make an exact copy of what I see in front of me. It's more of what am I feeling through this.
Every artist has a different reason for creating art. This is what we delve into on my show, The Heart of Art with Hector Nino, Saturdays at 2 p.m. on KAMU FM, and now you can access past episodes online or anywhere you get your podcasts.
So we organized this a little bit, Todd, so that we could talk a little bit about quick bites, what we're calling quick bites, which is things that we've observed over the past couple of weeks, things that we think people should be paying attention to. And I thought, you could start. This is kind of the appetizer to the meal. This is the soup and the salad.
Yeah. One thing I think we need to all keep in mind is that we're 210 days off from the election, or somewhere as close to that. It's a long way to go. So I was reviewing today some polls from at this point in the 2016 race and the 2020 race, and what you see, a lot happened between now and then. And so I think we're going to see a lot. I think we're seeing the Biden campaign kind of get focused on what they want to do. I think Trump, same way. So we're seeing already movements towards kind of a message and a strategy. But a lot's going to happen. And we're going to go through this time this summer when families are on vacation and they don't care about politics. And so we're going to see kind of the doldrums take place, and that's hopefully where the campaigns will be focusing on their ground game, and we won't see as much in the media.
Yeah, and we moved past the primary campaign, so we have both candidates now nominated, where there's no surprises there. And so the election's largely set in terms of the major choice that we're going to be looking at. And so now the campaigns sort of begin turning to the general election. And to some extent, they're already doing this. You're seeing Trump starting to think about Biden. We're seeing Biden starting to go around the country and visit various places to show, here's a chip factory that we're going to open up in Arizona. Here's a facility we're going to open up in Pennsylvania. So he's trying to get out there to use the advantages of incumbency to show what the federal government's doing to help people in these local areas, and especially in those swing states.
Yeah, and what we do is we move from the primary season, which on both sides, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican voter, it tends to be the most Democrat voter and the most Republican voter. So now that we have that they've ensured the nomination, we should see people move to the middle a little bit. And that's historical. That's what's happened. Historically, that's what's happened, and I would expect it to happen again, because you need to go after that median voter that you're trying to scoop 51% out of the voting pool, and so we see candidates moving a little bit to the center.
Yeah, and I think maybe two issues where we're really seeing that come to light right now is maybe Trump on abortion and Biden on, less so on immigration, but we expect him to make some movement on immigration. But certainly Trump on abortion, he has to play this really difficult dance. He's got to perform this difficult dance between appealing to his base voters who want him to be more right and conservative on abortion, and also thinking about median voters, because public opinion on abortion is less purely pro-life. It's more mixed and more nuanced than a lot of people than a pure conservative position.
One thing we might want to do is talk about a little bit what the median voter is. And if you were to take the voters and put them on a spectrum, who can capture that voter that's right in the middle?
Yeah.
And so I think Donald Trump has no desire to be considered a far to the right on abortion. I think he wants to be more to the middle. I think he feels like that probably cost people some elections in the last 2 years ago when we had elections. So I think that's what he's trying to do, is to come up with a sensible policy that can take that off the table. In the same way you talked about Joe Biden probably talking more about immigration, try to take it off the table so that they can't be used against him.
Yeah, and in political science for years we taught that if you were a candidate, you were smart, especially in the general election, to go to the median voter and to appeal to the median voter. What has happened over the last, several decades really, is increasingly campaigns are weighing the balance between going to the middle, playing to that median voter, playing to that person in the middle of the political spectrum, versus really appealing to the base, because the other challenge candidates have, you want people to be fired up. You want them to turn out for you, and the people who are most likely going to turn out for you are your base voters. And so it's a really delicate dance for these candidates to try to pull that off.
And what we have now in the modern campaign is that the nominees from the two parties tend to be from the extremes in the party. And so we have candidates they're far apart from each other. If you go back even 20, 30 years, you see two candidates that were much closer to each other, and so we have a lot of people say politics is divisive because you got two candidates that can't agree on anything. But I think there's a lot of reasons for that.
Well, one of the big things, and I think you worked this and moved to this direction just perfectly. One of the things we noticed over the last week really is the No Labels campaign. This group that's saying both political parties are at the extremes. They're playing to the extremes. We need to get rid of the partisan labels, and we need to appeal to that middle. They came out and they said, we can't find anybody to run. What do you think about that?
That's very interesting, because here they were going to be the great hope for somebody in the middle to run for them. And early on, Chris Christie said, "I'm not going to be a candidate for you," and Nikki Haley said she's not going to do that. And so, trying to find somebody that can be really considered a contender in politics, but not be with the party. I think what we're seeing is nobody wants to stake their career on this and be a third. We had Ross Perot back in 1992 when he ran as a third-party candidate, did very well. But we really, when Kennedy decided to run as an independent, that really took it. I think that stole the thunder from the No Labels candidate.
Yeah, but you still don't have that. It's much harder in American politics when people are watching American politics and they're looking at the two major political parties and they say, why can't someone just capture the middle? It's hard. And so you can have these third-party candidates. Ross Perot got 19% of the vote in 1992 who come up and they're attractive to a certain segment of voters that don't like either the two major candidates, but it is very hard to win. And No Labels started as, we're going to try to win this thing, and we don't want to just run a candidate to be a protest vote. And we already have a protest vote candidate, right? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is now sort of the protest voter candidate. We don't really even know with him where his voters are going. The Biden people think he may hurt them. The Trump people think he may hurt them. We don't know yet.
I looked at some early polls on that, and it looks to me like it's about 50-50, and it kind of depends on which state you're looking at. But it's not going to help Trump or help Joe Biden. I think it's going to be a mix there. But you are seeing interesting about anywhere from 10 to, in a state, anywhere from 10 to 15% of people voting for this third-party candidate, or a different candidate other than the Democrat or the Republican nominee. So that's in a way signaling there is some dissatisfaction out there with the two candidates.
Yeah, and we also saw this week one of the things that really grabbed my attention was that when we're looking at these primaries, even without Nikki Haley in the race, even with Joe Biden largely in an uncontested race as the incumbent president, we still have voters in each state voting for neither one of these candidates. So in a Republican primary, there are voters who aren't voting for Trump. In the Democratic primary, there are voters that aren't voting for Biden, even though there is no real serious opposition and the nomination's already wrapped up. That's pretty amazing at this point in the campaign. And we're talking about 20% of the electorate.
Yeah, I think that's a signal that, and we can talk about it in a minute when we talk about some polling, that voters are not totally satisfied with the candidates. And by that means that they, at least early on, they're signaling that we have some dissatisfaction. Of course, I'm a believer that as we get closer to November, people tend to come home to somewhere where they feel comfortable to vote for because they don't want to waste their vote.
Yeah.
And so that those numbers will probably drop down a little bit, and as we get closer to the November.
Yeah, and we've known for a long time in from political science studies that over the course of the campaign, maybe the most important thing that happens is people who are uncertain about a candidate but lean towards that candidate come home as you move towards Election Day. Likely Republicans become sure Republicans. Likely Democrats become sure Democrats, and the real question comes down to who can win those undecided voters and who can turn out their base vote the most successfully. So, well, when we come back, we're going to take a deep dive into polling, and we're going to tell you what polls are good, what polls are bad, and how to read the poll numbers 210 days out from the election.
This is Skip Richter, your host of Garden Success, a weekly garden show featuring advice and ideas to help you grow a bountiful garden and a beautiful landscape. So join me for Garden Success every Thursday at noon here on Aggieland's Public Radio, KAMU FM 90.9.
Howdy from Texas A&M. We're on a mission to find the best and brightest at Texas A&M, taking you behind the scenes of one of the nation's largest universities. In today's episode, we learn how A&M preserves and protects the earth and its heritage.
I come home and I'm covered in cannon, and I'm just like, who else gets to do this? The more I learned about it, it actually just kind of like fed into this new interest and new curiosity about bees.
Every time you open a case, you see something new, and I wish I could spend all day, every day out here.
Welcome to campus. Welcome to Texas A&M Today.
Stream seasons 1 and 2 now on KAMU's YouTube channel.
Todd, we both sort of have a background in polling, and sometimes you almost feel like you have to tell people real carefully that you were a pollster because people... polls have a bad reputation as pollsters. We have, like, yes, I'm the person who called and interrupted you during dinner and asked for your political opinions. But the thing about polling is it's so essential to American politics. And if you don't understand polling, you don't really understand the political process.
You know, it's really gotten to be where the average voter looks to the polls to kind of understand what's going on. Yeah. And so we have a horse race out there with several candidates, but polls give us some definition to that. And so it becomes very important to us. So I thought it would be really interesting for us, and that we agree that to talk a little bit about what makes up the polls, how to kind of understand them, and how to really use them is something that can be beneficial to us as we look at politics.
Yeah, and I think one of the other challenges is sometimes people are skeptical, overly skeptical, and so they want to say, I don't believe any polls. Well, the polls are telling us, they're revealing something about the political campaign, they're revealing something about politics. Or they believe them entirely, right? That the polls are telling us everything about the campaign, and it's somewhere in between. The polls are a signal. There's a lot of noise in that signal, but read carefully, they're really helpful. And also, they're strategic. I mean, you're using poll as a candidate. I mean, you've been the consultant, but I've also watched this as watching from the media side of things. Candidates don't take the numbers and just go, okay, that's where the race is. They look at the numbers and they go, okay, now what do we do next? How do we use this information to run a better, more successful campaign?
And one thing you brought out, you have extensive experience in the media, and a lot of my experience is working partisan politics. And so everybody's doing polls, but they're doing them kind of look at them different ways. The candidates, I always say that the most accurate poll, at least, is one that's done by a candidate's campaign, because they live and die by whether they know the truth or not.
Yeah.
Media has their own purpose for doing polls. So I think when we talk about who's doing the poll, we should understand the differences between a media-based poll and a campaign poll. A lot of the campaign polls, you'll never see the numbers.
Yeah.
But that's what they're using to change their advertising or to change their strategy, those internal numbers that they have.
Yeah, and one of the real I agree 110%. These professional pollsters, the people who are working for the campaigns, they're getting numbers every day. The media polls may be done once a month or once every couple of weeks, and they don't have the data that the professional campaign pollsters have. The challenge, or one of the things to keep in mind if you're watching polls being released, is the campaign pollsters, if they do release their numbers, they're releasing them for a reason. It's part of a campaign message. But if you can talk to them behind the scenes and you can talk to a pollster, they're going to tell you exactly what the numbers are. And they know the numbers because, as you said, they're living and dying by the numbers, and they're using them to make campaign strategy, decide what issue to focus on, how to phrase the issue. Maybe the one thing that we should correct, though, is rarely do candidates actually change their positions because of the polls. What they do is they say, I want to focus on issue A, and I want to focus on the immigration issue maybe instead of the abortion issue, or the economy issue rather than the immigration issue. But they don't usually flip positions, right?
No, that's exactly right. What a campaign's going to do is they're going to look at, okay, I need to get certain number of votes from a group of voters, and how am I going to reach them? And sometimes they know that if they have a deeply held position, they don't want to talk about it because it's not a winning strategy for them. And so they will try to create a kind of a bucket of campaign issues that are going to get them to that 50%. And that's where you're talking about. It's not changing who they are with a poll, it's changing what they're talking about. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, and so if the first question, if you're reading the polls, if we're talking to our audience here and we're saying, how do you know whether or not this is a good poll or a bad poll? The first question is who conducted it. The second question is, how'd you pick your respondents?
Yeah, the respondents, this probably for a poll is the most important thing, in my opinion, and that is having a random sample. What that means is if you look out there and you're looking at a congressional district, did everybody that you're trying to talk to have the same chance of answering that poll? And that way you're not excluding young people, you're not excluding old people. And so it's very important. Did they talk to a random look at the congressional district? This is kind of an easy way to think through this. If you were, you can't talk to everybody that's a voter. It's too expensive. It would take too long. What you want to do is pull a sample of those voters that match the entire population of voters. Like I always say, if you have a pot of chicken soup and you got a ladle and you reach down there and grabbed out some, what's in that ladle should be exactly or mirror as close as possible what's in the big pot. In the same way, that's what we do. We pull out a sample and we talk to them to make sure that we've got everybody who we talk to represents the group of voters out there in the district.
Yeah, and sometimes people don't really like the idea of sampling because, how can you talk to 1,000 people and represent the country or the state or whatever? And one of the funny, if you're fixing your chicken soup, how many bites of your chicken soup do you need to take before you know that it's good or bad? And as long as that spoonful gets a good mix of the soup, you know right away whether it's good or bad. And it's the same thing with sampling more generally. If you do the sample right, if it's representative, it's going to be a good reflection of the overall population. And we're going to know how good the sample is if it's based on a random sample because of probability theory.
Right. And we know, and we understand when you go into the whole country, whether it be that or a city or a state, we understand what percentage are males and females? What percentage are of different ethnicities? What percentage are how many have college degrees versus no college degrees? And so you begin to understand what it looks like. Can we talk to the people that are going to and get the opinions of those who represent that same group?
Yeah, and we can do a quick political history lesson, and I know you talk about this in your classes. I talk about it in my classes. The big history lesson in polling was 1936. Franklin Roosevelt is running against Alf Landon. And the polls come back. The Literary Digest is a major publication at the time, and the polls come back and they say that Alf Landon is going to defeat Franklin Roosevelt in the presidential election. Amazing. We've never had a President Landon. And the reason is, even though they did this big poll, millions of respondents, they were using an automobile list and they were using telephone list, and this is in the midst of the Great Depression, and so the sample that they pulled was not representative. At the same time, Gallup does a poll with a few thousand. They're doing quota sampling. We're not quite to random sampling yet, but it's a better, more representative sample, and they get the election right.
Yeah, it's I think to take that forward, you're exactly right. If your sample's bad, you're going to have a bad poll. So, and we can continue to talk about that. I think it's very important. So to get a polling firm who's going out and making sure their sample is right. I ask students in my class, how do I read, if I'm a polling firm and I want to ask your political opinions of a student 18 to 25, how can I reach you? and what they tell me, we don't know.
Yeah.
Because if you call my cell phone, we're not going to answer.
Yeah.
You can text me, but I don't know who you are. I'll probably delete it. And so I used years ago when I first started in this business, we would call a residence and there was a landline.
Yeah.
But cell phones have changed everything. So now we're moving towards calling cell phones, using the internet to reach people. But young people don't like to be reached like that. And so it's become more and more difficult to make sure that your sample is random. Older people are the easiest to reach, and they also vote in high numbers, so they're an important group. But I think more and more it's the kind of the loss of the landline has made polling more difficult.
Yeah, once upon a time with pollsters, they actually went door to door. We may have to go back to that if we really want to get a good representative sample. They did in-person sampling. Then they moved to telephone calls, and there was worry actually when they moved to telephone whether people would give you good data over the telephone. They did some comparisons. They realized, oh, actually telephone works better. Now we're in the digital age, and there's a question about how we can keep those good random samples. And we've been watching response rates just decline over time. Now on even a good telephone poll, oftentimes response rates are in the single digits. Gallup, the Pew Center for Research, these leading polling institutions in this country oftentimes are having a real hard time getting people to respond, which may just question the polls, but they still do a pretty good job.
They do. I can tell you, as somebody that worked in elective politics, on election day, we had done enough polls for our candidates that we knew who was going to win and lose. Just because the polls are good predictors of that. I think what we need to do is to understand there's difficulties in polling out there, and polling organizations are admitting it. So we need to take the results and understand what we have. And that's why I think if we look at a lot of polls that cover the same thing and begin to look at averaging many polls, we're probably going to diverge into something that's a little more truthful.
Yeah, and a number of organizations will do those aggregated polls for us so that we get a better sense of what's going on, because as a general rule, more data is always better, but when it comes to polling, there's always the qualification there. If you are trying to get good representative samples, you're going to have better data than if you just talk to lots of people.
Right. No, it's again, we go back to kind of, I don't want it to be trite here, but it's an art and a science.
Yeah.
It's being able to make sure you have the processes correctly, but also think through the art of it and to get the interviews you need to give you the information you need.
Yeah, and so we do actually get as long as we do as long as we follow the process right, as long as we're true to the methodology, we can get pretty reliable estimates of what people think. One thing, and with about 1,500 respondents, one thing that's always important to think about is beware of the subsamples. If we're talking about minority groups, if we're breaking it down by partisan affiliation or anything else, we always have to be careful, because once you take a subsample of a poll with 1,000 people, you may be talking about 100 people or 300 people, and so even if we're doing the poll right, the margin of error, the potential error around that number is going to be larger.
Yeah, we used to make it a practice to never report numbers if we didn't have at least 75 respondents in a group, which still made your margin of error very large. But that way you make sure that you're not presenting a result based on 10 people that you're able to talk to. So it's important to understand that the processes are correct.
Yeah. When we talk about polls, a lot of times we talk about polling as a snapshot, because we talked earlier that we're 210 days out from the election, and so we don't really trust that the polls are going to tell us who's going to win right now, right? I mean, we're too far out. There's too much to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And when maybe we should talk about margin of error, because
sure.
We know that the presidential election is different than other elections. It's 50 elections in 50 different states, and then through the Electoral College we add them up. So if you look at the polling data for a presidential candidate in each of those 50 states, so many of those states are, especially our battleground states that we consider really close, are within the margin of error, meaning that even though our result might have come out that one candidate's 51, one's 49, actually the result could have been reversed. And so so what you want to do when you look at a poll is to see how many interviews they did, and they will report their margin of error. So if you receive 51% in our poll, and the margin of error is plus or minus 3%, so what that's saying, it's somewhere between 48 and 54 is the actual result. And so you just have to be careful. And I think that was in the 2016 election that really got people. People turned their nose down at pollsters because they said they got it wrong.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time we were reading into a poll something that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
It was within the margin of error, but we were reporting that one candidate was ahead of the other.
Yeah, and to your point, the national polls in 2016. I don't think everyone knows this. I don't think everyone realizes it. The national polls in 2016 were actually pretty good. At the end of the day, the national polls were pretty predictive of how the Hillary Clinton vote and the Trump vote. At the state level, though, the polls were off, and in the presidential election, especially, the state numbers are what really matters. And so I remember watching that night as the election results were rolling in, and as soon as Florida started breaking more for Trump than the polling numbers had it, I thought, uh-oh. The poll numbers are a little bit off in Florida. They could be a little bit off in other places, because oftentimes if there's a mistake in polling, it's not a mistake just in one place, it's a mistake in a lot of places.
What's interesting about that is I think the Trump campaign worked really hard to bring some people into the election voting that maybe haven't voted in a while, so they may not have been on voting lists that were being called to be interviewed.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right. I think the polling firms got a kind of a black eye when really it wasn't deserved, because there was a lot of things happening there. And also, if you look at the difference between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, especially in some of the states, it was about 2 people per precinct. So it was very small margins.
Yeah.
And so if you got to take what you get with and understand it, that it's not predictive. It can give us some insight, but it's not going to always predict the winner.
Yeah, and this is the other really important thing that I think sometimes people miss about polling is polling's really good if the election's really uneven.
Yeah.
The closer and the more competitive the election gets, the harder it is to poll right, because the difference between the candidates is within the margin of error. So in a polarized country like we are right now, in a very tight political campaign in 2024 that looks like it will be similar to 2020 and 2016, it's going to be very hard for the polls to tell us who's going to win, because in a lot of these states, it's going to be, especially in these battleground states, it's going to be 50-50, and maybe even nationally it's going to be 50-50.
Right, and it's looking very close right now. Something that, going back to like who do we talk to, I was looking at polls just as I was preparing for today, and so many of these polls are based on registered voters.
Yes.
Okay, so they get a list of people that are registered to vote, and they make that their sample. Well, the problem is most states now have a motor voter law, meaning you go get your driver's license and they ask you, do you want to register to vote? You say yes. Well, you may have no intention to vote, but you're on these lists to call for a poll. And so first thing you want to look at is how many people did you talk to, and two, did you talk to likely voters? Mm-hmm. What that means is, did you talk to a group that maybe has voted in 2 out of the last 3 elections or 2 out of the last 4, and so you get a group that's probably going to vote as opposed to somebody that's just registered to vote. Yep. And that gives you much more precise information.
Yeah, and a good political poll has to make some assumptions about what the election is going to look like. And so, 2020 was a very high voter turnout election year. Is 2024 going to look like 2020? Or is it going to look like some other election year? So if we're expecting 70% turnout, then we're going to estimate our likely voter models very differently than if we're expecting 50% voter turnout. And different pollsters have a different secret sauce in terms of estimating those likely voters, and they don't really want to tell you because they don't want to give away their trade secret, right?
Well, yeah, you can. A lot of people now today, I think, have kind of started using how many times have you voted in the past?
Yeah.
Saying because it's public record, and I can say, okay, did you vote in the last mayor election, city council? All these. The more you vote, the more you're likely to vote. But we used to predict voting by an owner of a house is more likely to vote than a renter. How long you've lived in a community, if you live there longer, you're more likely to vote than somebody that just moved. These type of things, higher education votes more than lower education. And so that you can use to predict also, but I think most people now have gone to, did you vote in the past? You're more likely to vote in the future.
Yeah, and one of the challenges with predicting this is most people believe they're supposed to vote. So we also have what we refer to as social desirability biases here that people want to tell you. So if Todd is calling me and asking me if I'm going to vote, I'm going to tell him yes, even though I have no intention to doing, because I don't want Todd to think I'm a bad person. And so it's a trick sometimes in order to figure out who's serious about voting. I've also seen where pollsters are asking, okay, you say you're going to vote. Do you know where to vote? Do you have a plan on election day? What's your plan on are you going to go in the morning? Are you going to go in the afternoon? All to sort of press people a little bit to find out whether they're serious and they're actually going to turn out and vote. But a good political poll has to know who you're voting for and whether you're going to turn out.
Yeah, and a lot of times when when there's issues that you have a social desirability problem, you know what I mean? And you don't want people to answer how you think they want you to answer. So what you do is you ask the same question in several different ways to try to get at it, so that you can kind of understand really what the voter is thinking on these issues. And you do that by asking good questions. A lot of times you're thinking about what's a good poll versus a not so good poll is one that asks good questions that are not leading the person in any way, that allow the person to respond. Also, you typically don't want to ask questions in your poll that the voter is unlikely to be able to answer. It's like a hard test question, because if you do that, they're probably going to just guess because they don't want to say, "Oh, I don't know." Or they're less likely to do that. So what you wanted to make sure your results are really high quality is you want to ask questions that are getting at opinions as opposed to people making it up.
So the challenges of contemporary polling, we've talked about sort of the response rates and trying to connect with people, but also polls have kind of moved away from random sampling because random sampling becomes so hard because we have digital technology, and increasingly moving more towards online sampling. And those polls are thought to be not quite as good.
Yeah, I think almost every polling organization is either doing online or some mix, and where they use some kind of telephone polling, look at the numbers from the internet polling, and say to help them to refine it. And it is a problem. They are, I think, trying to develop a sample that's random for their internet poll.
Yeah.
It's the problem is when you get somebody that really wants to answer your questions, you wonder if they're too zealous, and so you don't know what you're actually getting out of that. So it's difficult. It is really one of the issues that's really affecting the whole industry, and it's not just political polling; it's survey research in general. Is more difficult these days because of the cell phone.
Yeah.
And no landlines, and we started years ago where you called between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. because
always interrupt dinner, right?
You interrupt dinner, and you figure that the people probably are not at work still. The problem with doing that is the 18 to 29-year-old was out at a bar or a restaurant. They weren't home, so you got 65 plus answered all the time, and so you had to make sure you work through those issues. But I think the internet makes it's more cost effective, but it also brings its own set of problems.
Yeah, so we've talked about some of the problems with polling, but at the beginning we were sort of saying don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. The polls are still helpful. They help candidates even if they don't tell us exactly who's winning and who's losing an election. What do you think we're 210 days out. What do you think the polls are telling us right now about the 2024 election?
In my opinion, what we're seeing is both candidates, their negatives are higher than their positives. Their favorables or unfavorables are higher than their favorables. What that means is, I think we're going to see a lot of movement. But I think what you're going to have is like pretty much every other campaign is people moving back to what's home. I may say I'm unhappy with you either as the president or as the former president, but when it comes down to it, it's going to be very difficult for me to vote for somebody else. Yeah. So what campaigns begin to focus on is who's going to vote. Can I keep you from voting? Maybe you don't like me, but can I keep you from voting from the other by not voting? Yeah. So turnout becomes very important. And that really is what you'll see is they'll use polling and other things like that to say, who do we need to focus on to get them out the vote to give us the best chance to win?
And that involves lots of different things, going from issues to image to all sorts of different other characteristics. Yeah, I would agree with you that right now, if we're looking at this race, the things that you worry about as someone worried about democracy is we have two candidates that aren't very well liked. We don't know what the people in the middle are going to do. I do expect people on the right, Republicans, to hold their nose and vote for Trump. I expect Democrats to hold their nose and vote for Biden. The real question, I think you hit it right on the head, is are any of those two groups, those, let's call them nose holders for lack of a better word, or we talked about sometimes they're referred to as double haters, they don't really like either one of the candidates, are any one of those groups who might have gone to Biden or might have gone to Trump going to stay home on Election Day because they just don't like either one? And that's probably where the election gets decided.
It probably does. I mean, because I think you're talking about very small percentages. Just a few people stay home can throw it one way or another. I mean, if you look at 2016, even 2020, it was very close on a state-by-state basis. And so if people stay home or they opt to vote for the third party.
Yeah, and we could basically fill up Kyle Field and we could take all the people in there and put them in different states and make them registered voters. Of course, this would draw all sorts of criticism. But if we could make them registered voters in different states, and we went back to 2020 or 2016, we could change the election outcome. That's all the voters we needed across 3 or 4 states, and that was true in 2016, and it was true in 2020, and it looks like it's going to be true in 2024 again.
Yeah, and if you look at the polls today, even though we are 210 days out, you're seeing it's still close. Most of the battleground states are within the margin of error, so that tells us it's going to be close. It really is. So we're going to see what happens. It's going to be a long summer, and then when fall hits, we're probably going to be very tired of politics.
Yeah, one of the things that we know about elections campaigns in the United States, especially, they're very long. We've decided to have a political system that sets up a very long campaign, and so, but we're in it for the long haul, and we hope that the audience here is with us for the long haul as well. We're going to be here trying to dissect the campaign, trying to work through the issues. We're going to talk about media and politics. We're going to talk about money in politics. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of other things that come up over the course of, but we're going to be hopefully guiding you through this decision-making process so that you can be an informed voter, and we can help you get to the right decision for you. So that's it. That's episode 1 of Inside Political Science. Thank you for your time.
Inside Political Science is a production from KAMU, Aggieland's public television and radio. For more information, visit tx.ag/Inside Political Science and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss a new episode.